Usually when the Grizzlies call 12, he picks up the phone. But look, 12 couldn't answer the phone in the fourth quarter of this game. So 22 picked up the phone and answered. We're going to talk about the breakout and the emergence of another closer for the Grizzlies coming up right here, right now on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? I am Damichael Cole, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. Beat right here for the commercial appeal here in Memphis, Tennessee. And wow, the Grizzlies salvaged a 4-game road trip. Won the first game in Sacramento, lost 2 straight in Utah, and it all came down to going against a 5-1 Portland Trailblazers team that had been one of the best teams in the Western Conference up to this point of the season. And even missing its star player in Damian Lillard, Portland they looked like a formidable opponent. But in the end, the Grizzlies persevered, and it was ugly. It wasn't the prettiest of games, but when you go on a 4-game road trip, look, you're ready to get home. A win is a win. Now let's get back to Memphis. I'm sure that's what the guys are thinking, and now they'll get ready for a 3-game home trip at the FedEx Forum. So that's going to be a fun time, but it was a fun time last night in the end when the Grizzlies came out with the 111-106 win against the Trailblazers. And, I mean, we talk a lot about how it's a game of runs, and this game was one of those games. It personified it at the beginning. It personified it at the end. The Grizzlies started the game on a 12-2 run right out of the gates, and then before you knew it, Portland came back with its own 12-2 run, and the game was tied up at 14. Justin Nurkic, who we talked about, Steven Adams matching up against Nurkic, how big of a matchup that would be. And we saw in this game, when Nurkic went out of the game, the Grizzlies would try to get Steven Adams his rest breaks and things like that. And when Nurkic came back in, there were some times when Steven Adams hadn't checked back into the game yet, and he kind of abused, some smaller matchups, and he got some switches even when Steven Adams was in the game. He got a couple switches on some smaller guys and things like that, and kind of had his way. So he was a tough matchup. Anthony Simons, the Grizzlies held him scoreless in the first quarter. They outscored Portland by 7 points and managed to hold Anthony Simons scoreless in that first quarter. But, I mean, Dylan Brooks was the reason in that first. We talk a lot about what he can, what he can't do, and 9 points, 0 assists. Yeah, you remember he said he wants to average 4 to 5 assists. It's not looking too likely at this point, but what he did do was he contained Anthony Simons in that first quarter and really in the first half all around. So a big win for the Grizzlies, I think. It's a big win because you look around the Western Conference and a lot of those traditional powers, a lot of those teams that people say, oh, this team is going to be at the top of the Western Conference. They're struggling right now. This is a chance for the Grizzlies to kind of create some space before theoretically some of those teams get going. If you look at the top of the West right now, the Grizzlies are 4th. But if you look at the top 5 teams, this is how it's shaping up. The Suns, okay, we kind of expected the Suns to be there. But outside of the Suns, check this out. The Trailblazers are 2. The Jazz are 3, the Grizzlies are 4, the Spurs are 5. Basically, the Suns and 3 teams that you didn't expect to be there in the Blazers, the Jazz, and the Spurs. And then if you go on down to 6, 7, 8, the Nuggets, okay, you expected the Nuggets to be there. Pelicans, okay. Then the Thunder are 8. So right now, the 9, 10, 11, 12 teams are, I think, for the most part, teams that most NBA experts projected to be in the playoffs or at least the play-in. That's the Mavericks at 9, Timberwolves 10, Clippers 11, Warriors 12. I'm saying all that just to say this is a chance for the Grizzlies to kind of create some space there. They don't have much space. Now, granted, the Grizzlies are only, half a game up on the 9 seed, which is the Dallas Mavs at this point. So, it's not a lot of space, but every win matters over the course of a season. But thank you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies. I appreciate you for tuning in. Make sure you continue to tune in. This episode today is brought to you by the one and only Prize Picks. See, Prize Picks is for first-time users. They can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKED ON. Again, that's the promo code LOCKED ON. First-time users, 100% instant deposit match up to $100. So that means if you deposit $100, you get $100 back in the match. All you have to do is go to theprizepicks.com and put in the promo code LOCKED ON. Make sure you continue to listen to Locked On Grizzlies each and everywhere we are. That's Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere, just like the air. So thank you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you continue to like, comment, subscribe. We love the reviews. We love the comments. We take all that in and we embrace it in our episodes. So continue to do that as well to formulate our coverage. But we're breaking down the game here, and I'm talking about the ebbs and flows and the runs that happened throughout this game. And the run at the beginning of the game, 12-2 run Grizzlies, 12-2 run Blazers. And you go to the fourth quarter, 78-72 game. Grizzlies up 6 points, and they're kind of sputtering. Memphis is up 6, but you can feel the momentum switching in Portland's direction. And then Desmond Bane happened. Desmond Bane started that fourth quarter, 2 3-pointers right out of the gates. He made 3 3-pointers in the first 2.5 minutes. All of that was part of the Grizzlies lead going from 6 to 17 points. There was a lot that transpired after that. The Grizzlies did eventually blow that 17-point lead, and it was in a span of 3 minutes. The game was tied up down the stretch. And guess what? Desmond Bane, again, scored the final 11 points to seal the victory. 20 points in the fourth quarter for Desmond Bane. And we know the Grizzlies can call 12. We know they can. But think about it. Think about the people you call all the time, the people you like to call on your phone every single day. Do they answer the phone every single time? I don't think so. You have the reliable people who answer the phone most of the time. And that's what Ja Morant is as one of the best clutch scorers in the NBA. He's going to answer the phone most of the time. But that one time he sleeps, one time he's busy doing something, or whatever the case may be, he misses the call, and you need someone else to call. Last season, the Grizzlies didn't have someone else to call, unfortunately, and that's why we saw in that Golden State series when the Grizzlies went into a couple of those games into the fourth quarter, tight battles. I'm thinking of Game 4 when the Grizzlies were tied with the Warriors going into the final 2 minutes, and the Warriors basically, put the Grizzlies in a scoring drought and closed that game out. And then Game 6, the Grizzlies went to the fourth quarter in a tight battle. And then the Warriors pulled away because they were better equipped at having closers. Desmond Bane is becoming a second closer for the Grizzlies. And this is a huge development. As we know, on most nights, you're going to have what Ja Morant's doing. Ja Morant, again, one of the best clutch scorers in the NBA last season. But the stats are backing it up. This is not me just throwing this out there Desmond Bane just scored 20 points in the fourth quarter. He's becoming one of the better second half scorers or fourth quarter scorers in the game. I want to shout out my old co-host, Stats, my guy Sean Coleman. He actually, brought up some of these statistical numbers in after, the game last night. And one of the things that stood out was Desmond Bane in the second half of games this year is averaging 16.2 points per game while shooting 53% from the field, 49% from three, and 88% from the free throw line. Bane is in the category with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Giannis Antetokounmpo as the only players with 3 or more 20-point second halves this season. He's taking control of some games. The most recent one that comes to mind is the 38-point effort against the Brooklyn Nets. But now with Desmond Bane, you have 4 consecutive games of 29 or more points. How about it? His streak, he had 3 consecutive games of 30 or more points. He falls 1 point shy in this game. Bane finished this game with 29 points. But, the Grizzlies needed all 29 in this game. He was 10 of 11 from the free throw line, which is, an incredible night. But he makes 1 free throw. He gets that 30th point to continue that streak. But 4 games of 29 or more points is nothing to sneeze at. This is a big picture thing with Bane here that we're discussing. And if Desmond Bane continues to emerge as that second closer for the Grizzlies, this team's going to be tough to stop. We've talked about the pick or poison thing that's kind of developing here. Ja Morant, very off night by his standards. Finished with 20 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists. That was the good. But he was 7 of 19 from the field, and he had 8 turnovers. Portland did a great job of walling Morant up at the rim, forcing him into some difficult passes and things like that. Where have we seen this picture before? Against the Minnesota Timberwolves in the playoffs last season. How did that end? Desmond Bane having an incredible playoff series against the Timberwolves. So the emergence of Desmond Bane as that second closer takes the Grizzlies to an entirely new level. You look at some of the greatest teams in the history of NBA. If their primary guy has a off night, with LeBron James, you had a Dwayne Wade, you had a Kyrie Irving, and players like that. With a Shaq, you had Kobe, and with a Dwayne Wade, you had Shaq, and so forth. The Grizzlies now have Ja Morant and Desmond Bane to pick up. So we'll see how that develops over the course of the season, but it's no hyperbole to say, it's no exaggeration to say right now, Desmond Bane is playing at an all-star level. I'll tell you about someone who's not playing at an all-star level right now, but he's playing incredible basketball for a rookie, and that's David Roddy. We're going to talk about David Roddy in a second coming up after the break, because the rookie, he quite frankly just had one of his better games to date. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you about Prize Picks. See, the thing about Prize Picks is you can always, there's personal endorsements here where, I like to go, Luka Doncic right now, he scored over 30 points in every single game. If you see 28, if Luka's projected to score 28 and a half points, you're probably going to take the over on that. Or you're going to take, if you're going to say, hey, Steph Curry's projected to make 3.5 threes, you might want to go above that as well. So the thing about Prize Picks is all you have to do is pick 2 to 5 players, and if they will go score more or less than their Prize Pick projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. You're also not competing against other people. It's you versus the projections available. And don't forget, Prize Picks offers you projections on any sport that you watch. It's not just the NBA. I'm talking NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football. Hello, college basketball is right around the corner. That's men and women's college basketball, soccer, WNBA, wherever you like to make those entries. And remember, you can take 60 seconds or less to make those entries, and they're fast and safe withdrawals with Prize Picks. And they're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Shout out to our Canadian viewers on Locked On Grizzlies as well. All you have to do is download the Prize Pick apps, go to prizepicks.com and sign up for the daily fantasy sports. Again, first-time users, you get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. So all you have to do, enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And the Grizzlies, they're having a great season overall in my perspective, because, it hasn't been the prettiest of things. You're 5-3. But you can see the light developing here. Let me explain. Ja Morant, over 30 points per game. Desmond Bane, as we just mentioned, turning into another closer. John Conchar is shooting the three-pointer at a high level. Santi Aldama, he's had his ups and downs, but he's developing, I think, into someone you can consider a reliable role player, someone you will give minutes off of the bench when Jaren Jackson Jr. is healthy. That wasn't always the case with Santi Aldama. Steven Adams is still playing like the brick wall, and 5 assists last night for Steven Adams. He's continuing to really dominate the game in those dribble handoffs, finding guys for back cuts, and players are loving cutting off of him. So you got all these things going great with the starters. With the shooting, you have more players shooting the basketball. But here's the biggest, I think, development. You can see the light with these rookies, specifically Jake LaRavia and David Roddy. We praised on Jake LaRavia last week when he made his 9 of 15 so far from three-point range, 60% on three-pointers overall, which at the time of him battling the non-COVID illness was the highest among rookies in the NBA with at least 15 three-point attempts. And quite frankly, if you look at, what he's brought to the game, Jake LaRavia is another guy who's helped his team shooting ability and things like that. And then there's David Roddy. Roddy the Body, D-Rod, whatever you like to call the guy, he's coming along. And I will continue to emphasize that that's the reason I said this has been a great start to the season, because these guys know they're not playing great basketball. If you go back a week ago, David Roddy was one of the worst graded players in the NBA, offensively and defensively all around. But the light, you can see it start to turn on for him. There were a couple plays I want to highlight. David Roddy catches the ball in the corner in yesterday's game against Portland. Pump fakes as the defender goes by, drives to the basket, and he did not look sped up. He looked like whoever would have gotten open, he would have passed the ball to. He would have made the right play. Those were times where I feel like earlier David Roddy forces that shot. He gets it up, or he takes one dribble, just tries to get a quick shot up while he's open for that. But you can see him developing patience. You can see it slowly materializing for him. And who knows when the light of consistency will click on. Again, these are rookies. They're going to have those rookie walls and the just inevitable ebbs and flows of a rookie season. But you can see the light. You can see Jake LaRavia and David Roddy impacting this roster in March and April at a higher level. You can see it because, again, I've talked a lot about how the Grizzlies are high on David Roddy's defense and, what he's adding there, what he brings to the table as, an all-around defender who can guard twos, who can guard threes, who can guard fours, who can even, bang with fives, like he did at the collegiate level. But he's shooting the basketball better. He made 3 3-pointers against Portland for the first time in an NBA game yet, 10 points overall, and he also had 2 steals, 2 assists as well. 2 assists tied his career high, and now he's had 2 steals in 3 consecutive games for David Roddy. You say 2 steals in 3 consecutive games. Okay, so what? What's important about that? Well, if you go to his first 5 games of the season, David Roddy had 1 steal. First 5 games, 1 steal. Last 3 games, 2 steals, 2 steals, 2 steals. And the result is he's had 2 of his 3 highest game scores yet in 2 of his last 3 games. One of those games, he shot 0 of 8 against Utah, had a very bad game overall, but again, was very impactful defensively in that game. 4 or 5 from the field 2 games ago in Utah, 2 or 3 from three-point range. This past game, 3 of 6 overall, 3 of 6 from three-pointers. And you may look at this and say, he's only settling for threes. Again, there were a couple times where David Roddy drove to the basket. And him driving to the basket, other defenders committed, and he made the right pass. Maybe he forces those shots in other situations. But I think his overall development here, you're talking about a guy who has now scored double figures 3 times this season. I remember, I pointed out a while ago, after 4 games, no Grizzlies player except Xavier Tillman was +1. Outside of Xavier Tillman Sr. being +1 in 1 game, in the first game of the season against the New York Knicks, no Grizzlies player had finished with a positive plus-minus that came off the bench through the first 4 games. Well, if you look at David Roddy's last 4 games, here we go. +11, +7, -20 in that clunker against Utah on Halloween, +5 last night against Portland. So 3 of his last 4 games, positive plus-minuses. Before that, 0. I think you can see the light with this guy, and I don't think it's, it screams superstardom. We're not talking about, the next big thing or anything like that. We're talking about guys who can complement Ja Morant, who can complement Desmond Bane, who can say, Ja and Des, when guys want to double team you, we're going to make them pay. And guys can say, on the defensive end, look, we want you guys to guard lesser scorers so you can get more of a break. We're going to take on the task of guarding, the guys, the high volume the high usage players so you can get a little bit of an energy break on defense. David Roddy has turned into one of those guys. Talked about Jake LaRavia turning into one of those guys. Seeing these rookies show the signs are good for the Grizzlies because you're going to see it more throughout the second half of the season. Think about last year. I keep going back to that. Zaire Williams was also one of the worst graded players in the NBA at this point. And quite frankly, the light didn't click on for him until he got a chance to sit down, for a while in late November and December and really just break down the film. That's when the light clicked on for him. David Roddy and Jake LaRavia are having good moments a little bit earlier. And granted, they're both older prospects, so that's something you can expect. But that's one of the better developments so far. Another good development was the Grizzlies' defense. Finally playing up to the Grizzlies' standard of basketball. We're going to break that down coming up after the break. But first, before we get to that, thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now for your second listen, I want you to go check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, Locked On Sports Today is where you go beyond the scoreboard, behind the scenes with the local experts like myself and insights only Locked On can provide. So that's Locked On Sports, available on right here on this app, or you can go get it on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Locked On Sports Today is available. So the Grizzlies are now 5-3, and we entered, this stretch when the Grizzlies were 4-3. On last episode, we talked a lot about how the defense has been struggling. 28th in defensive rating, allowing opponents to shoot 48% from the field. And then you said, man, hello, Portland's coming to the building now. Portland, even, without Damian Lillard, has shot the basketball well. But you know what the Grizzlies defense did? Held Portland to 40.4% shooting from the field. It was the lowest shooting game of the season for the Trailblazers by a lot. I think the lowest before this was 43%. And quite frankly, this came even after the Grizzlies had more defensive breakdowns late in the fourth quarter to kind of, allow Portland to get back in that game after Memphis built a 17-point lead. So it wasn't a perfect night defensively, but overall, the Grizzlies showed a lot of positive signs in this game where you can see the light bulb turning on. And here are some of the things I noticed. One, the main thing is the effort, right? There were times we talked about when guys were open against Utah, and it would have been probably a waste of energy for guys to round and close out, or it could have been effective because they weren't going to block the shot. That's how open some guys were in those couple games against Utah. But there were a lot of times where the closest defender was just looking. He'd see the shooter and he'd say, I can't do nothing with that. Hopefully he misses. In this game, you saw the Grizzlies attacking Jeremy Grant. You saw Dillon Brooks all over Anthony Simons. And Simons is a great player. He came to this game averaging 20.5 points. So he got hot. He finished with 31 points in his game. But he did most of his damage late because early on, Dillon Brooks kind of gave him a hard time in this game. Dillon Brooks got things going at the point of attack. Talked about Justin Nurkic earlier on. He did expose some mismatches, and quite frankly, he's 6'11", 290 pounds. Like, the guy's huge. If Steven Adams isn't guarding him, it's a tough night for anyone else. They're just too small, and he is very effective inside at scoring, and then he was effective from the three-point line. The guy was making his three-pointers. He was knocking them down. So, the big night from Justin Nurkic, at least going into the fourth quarter, kind of, it was a tough assignment overall because he plays much more aggressive when Damian Lillard is out. But overall, the defense, it was impressive to watch this defense finally, live up to the standard. And I think it's something you can look forward to and say, hey, now you have to build these. You got to stack good performances on top of each other as a defense. One of my takeaways was the fact that, you had Anthony Simons get going late. But Jeremy Grant, 7 of 18 shooting from the field. He was that guy who's been that third guy, that third scorer without Damian Lillard for them, along with Anthony Simons and Joseph Nurkic. Along with Santi Aldama doing a good job on him. We had just a bunch of players kind of doing their parts and limiting Jeremy Grant because he's an aggressive scorer. He can shoot the basketball. He loves to drive it. And they held him to 7 of 18 shooting from the field. And here's another one. 5 Portland starters. Of all the Portland starters that played more than 30 minutes had 3 or more turnovers. Anthony Simons, 4 turnovers. Josh Hart, 3 turnovers. Jeremy Grant, 4 turnovers. Joseph Nurkic, 3 turnovers. That sounds more like the Grizzlies defense, doesn't it? We talk about, causing havoc, disruption, just leading those, those type of sequences for opponents. And the Grizzlies did that. 20 forced turnovers in this game for the Grizzlies. And on top of that, you talk about holding the team to 40% shooting, and you limited their possessions by forcing 20 turnovers. Now, Portland did do a great job on the offensive glass, and then credit goes to a guy like Nurkic. And how about, Justice Winslow? Sounds a familiar name in Grizzlies Nation. 2 points only, but he did have 8 boards. He was a big part of that rebounding effort as well. I think Portland ended the game with 16 offensive rebounds to the Grizzlies 10. Overall, the rebounding was even, 46-46 overall. The Grizzlies had 5 blocks. They had 7 steals. So you combine that with 20 turnovers, 40% shooting from the field. This was the best job that a team has done against the Portland Trailblazers this season from the defensive end. And now it's going to be encouraging to see how can the Grizzlies stack these performances on top of one another, because next you have the Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte Hornets, they have 2 dynamic scorers who are probably not going to play. LaMelo Ball is definitely not going to play, but Terry Rozier is another guy who is in the injury protocols, dealing with an ankle injury. I believe he played the first 2 games of the season and hasn't played since. But overall, this Charlotte team average over 113 points a game. The Grizzlies average over 117. They are very capable of being dynamic. They still have Kelly Oubre. They still have, Gordon Hayward. They have guys capable of scoring. So let's see if the Grizzlies could stack good defensive performance on top of one another, because at the end of the day, if we're being honest here, a team that's missing LaMelo Ball and Terry Rozier, 2 of their best offensive weapons, is a team that the Grizzlies should dominate on that side of the floor. Then after that, you play Charlotte on Friday, and then on Sunday you get the Washington Wizards. Again, we saw the trouble that Lauri Markkanen gave Memphis. Then you're talking about a guy like Kristaps Porzingis. But we'll get more into those guys in the next episode when we discuss previewing those upcoming games. But this is more just to heap praise. We've given the Grizzlies defense a tough time. We talked about the 28th in defensive rating. We talked about, allowing opponents to shoot a high field goal percentage, to over 25 assists per game from opponents. And even in this game, Portland did finish with a high assist number. I think Portland had 27 assists total, but 27 assists to 20 turnovers. I think you'll take that any day when you're forcing turnovers at that level. But this is a kudos to the Grizzlies defense. I think it started with Dillon Brooks. Santi Aldama had a really solid game. That's another guy we talked about. His defensive awareness needs to improve in certain situations. 2 blocks for him. Ja Morant as well. Struggled offensively in the fourth quarter. Made a huge steal to kind of seal the game in the final minute there. He had 2 steals overall, and just quite frankly, he picked it up, right? This is what we talked about before the season. Ja Morant kind of becoming that 2-way player. So now when he has nights like this, when he's shooting 7 of 19, you still feel the impact of Ja Morant. And proof of that is, if you look at the starters, Desmond Bane, of course, he led the way, +6 in the plus and minus column. The only other starter to finish with a positive plus minus was Ja Morant at +1, in his 32 minutes of action. And that's because he played solid defense. His scoring wasn't at, the normal level of a Ja Morant, but He picked it up on the defensive end of the floor, got that steal as well late down the stretch. So some encouraging defense from the Grizzlies. You got encouraging performances from the rookies lately. Jake LaRavia, who did not play in this game. I think, him coming back from the non-COVID illness, I think this is more of, the Grizzlies just taking their time, letting him heal up. But they used the 9-man rotation, so there is a spot available for him to, be more impactful going forward. We'll see what happens. The Grizzlies are going to be back home. So, of course, next week we're going to have much more, intel and updates on what's going on around the team. I know there are a lot of questions that you have, and we're going to try to get those answered for you as well. But thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every day. And once again, I want to tell you to go make the Locked On Sport Today podcast your second listen, because it's the biggest stories of the day. Plus, on top of that, you get the instant reactions, you get the big game recap, and you can get the take of the day regarding what's going on in the NBA. So it's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple's Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies. And next up, we're going to preview this game against the Charlotte Hornets, and then we're going to talk about some big picture things as well for the Grizzlies. Game against the Hornets coming up, game against the Wizards, 2 very winnable games. The Grizzlies are 5-3. Again, more opportunities to stack wins on another and really create some space in a crowded Western Conference that features a bunch of struggling teams. Thank you again for tuning in. I am your host, Damichael Cole, and we'll see you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.